All right, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. Welcome to our Board of Education special call meeting of the board. It is Tuesday, April 9th, 5:31. Good evening to our board members, to our public. We have a quorum. Everyone is here. We have all board members here in the boardroom with us, along with Superintendent Moore. So we do have a quorum. If you would stand with me to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, again, we are here in the Wake County Board of Education Central Office boardroom with a special call meeting today with a singular item on our agenda, which is a recommendation to move grades 4 and 5 to Plan A and move from Plan B to Plan A. Before we get into that agenda, just have an information item here for comments. Superintendent Moore doesn't have any comments until her update and recommendation. I don't have any comments as well. Board members interview wish to share any comments today? No? Okay.
I mean, I'm assuming we'll have a chance to comment during the discussion.
Yeah, I'm just saying just the general board comments. Right.
But I might want to say that Millbrook High School boys won the state championship. Hate to let that go by.
Congratulations to our Millbrook boys. Thank you, Board Member Cash, for recognizing that. I'm sure we'll probably have more next Tuesday in more grand fashion, I'm sure. But congratulations to them nonetheless. All right. Then again, we have one action item on our agenda. And you have that before you, as I said, to move the recommendation to move or consider moving grades 4 or 5 from Plan B to Plan A. So at this time, if nothing else, if I can receive a motion to approve tonight's meeting agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion from Ms. Johnson-Hostler, second from Mrs. Cash to approve tonight's meeting agenda as printed. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Meeting agenda is approved. So again, we have the one action item, and that is to hear from our superintendent and to consider a recommendation to move grades 4 or 5 to Plan A. I'll turn it over this time to Superintendent Moore.
Thank you, Chair Sutton and board members. The presentation is in Assembly, and we'll be pulling it up in just a moment to go through it. We are bringing, as a second semester update, our recommendation for and background for grades 4 and 5. Our desired outcomes for this item are to review the current factors and considerations that have been used by staff in making its recommendation to increase in-person instruction, and to seek approval from the Board of Education members for the staff recommendation. As a reminder, the following considerations have been used for all decisions about returning to in-person instruction since the fall of 2020. There is no single metric that is being calculated from these three areas that automatically trigger a return or a decision to increase in-person attendance. All three are used and given weight based on the circumstances. Did we lose the presentation? Okay. There have been several considerations involving state restrictions in the past month, but three of the most recent are also most important and relevant here today. Effective February 26th, Governor Roy Cooper announced Executive Order 195, which eased several COVID-19 restrictions due to declining community spread and an increase in vaccine distributions. Then, it went down again. Okay. All right, so you all have it. If you would like, I'm on slide 4. give you a moment if you'd like to pull it up, since it seems to be not behaving. Okay, so we're on slide 4. So you're following along on slide 4. So, Executive Order 195. And then on March 3rd, the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services issued revised guidance that encourages more in-person instruction with appropriate safety measures. In its guidance, NCDHHS cited the growing harm to children who are out of school, including negative impacts on academic and mental health. On March 4th, the State Board of Education endorsed the guidelines released by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Moving on to the next slide. When we look at state and county data, the average 2-week percentage of positive cases has been on a downward slope since the post-holiday spike in January. The percent of tested positive in Wake County currently stands at 4.5%, with daily cases similar to levels of mid-November. While certainly welcome, the district would of course like to see a further decline in this area. The state rate had decreased as of this, when this presentation was put together, to 4.6. I think it's been updated to data 5.2. It's been hovering in that 4.5 to 5 range. Daily cases from the state level are similar to levels of mid-October. While both of these decreases are encouraging, strict compliance throughout the community is still needed to reduce the likelihood of secondary transmission involving staff and students while off campus. District indicators are continuing to move in the right direction. More than 5,800 employees will have received their first dose of vaccine at events organized specifically for WCPSS employees. More than 10,000 employees have responded to a vaccine survey in which 83% said they either received a vaccine or had an appointment scheduled. Outreach continues to all employees. Confirmed secondary transmissions while on campus remain extremely low. Looking at all three of these areas, we can summarize: the governor, North Carolina DHHS, and State Board of Education recommend an increase of in-person instruction using appropriate safety protocols. State and local rates are trending down after a post-holiday increase. Vaccination rates are currently exceeding expectations. Confirmed secondary transmissions rates on campus remain very low. The recommendation that staff is bringing for board review and approval this evening: all students in grades 4 and 5 who are not enrolled in the virtual academy should attend in-person instruction daily. They will join pre-K 3 students and special education regional program students K-12, already on Plan A. Students in grades 6-12 will remain in their current rotations. Staff is bringing some recommendations for board feedback for grades 6-12 on March 16th. I want to thank the thousands of teachers and principals who have made it possible to reach this point. I also want to thank our parents who have stuck with us and given us consistent feedback about what they were thinking, extended grace and patience and some choice words at times as we weathered the pandemic together. As I said during my comments on March 2nd, it will be a while before we see normal, as we call it in schools again, but we can begin to safely return more students to in-person instruction in the coming days and weeks. We look forward to doing so. We look forward to sharing the remaining details with you regarding middle and high school on March 16th. And we are happy to answer any questions. We are making this recommendation to begin March 15th.
All right, thank you, Superintendent Moore. So board members, you have before you the recommendation from staff for our approval to move grades 4 and 5 to Plan A for non-virtual academy students beginning Monday, March 15th. If I can entertain a motion. Ms. Kushner?
Thank you, Chair Sutton. I'd like to make a motion to approve the recommendation to move grades 4th and 5th to Plan A for non-virtual academy students beginning Monday, March 15th.
Second.
Got a motion from Mrs. Kushner, second from Mr. Hagerty to approve the recommendation from staff to move grades 4 and 5 to Plan A for non-virtual academy students beginning Monday, March 15th. Is there any discussion? Start with Ms. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. And this it's every decision point we've made has been fairly difficult, and this is it's like all the others before us. I think it's not. We're balancing competing needs. When we had initially planned to bring grades 4th and 5th back on to Plan A on January 20th, as we all remember, and we did put a pause on that for good reasons. And the concerns at that time were the coming of vaccinations were around the corner, that we had issues with substitute teaching staffing, and the community metrics. And we, I think, wisely put a pause at that time to delay bringing 4th and 5th back and stayed in cohort rotations. And now those 3 points have improved. We have improved our substitute teaching access. One school I went to today told me about the impact of having 2 permanent subs every day in their school, and that was making a big impact. The community metrics have gone down wonderfully because the vaccinations are here, and we're starting those vaccinations with our educators. So I think it is a good time for us to approve this recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Kushner. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. I first want to be clear that I am not advocating for closing schools. That is sometimes projected on me. That is not at all what I am doing. I believe that the CDC is filled with good scientists who know what they're talking about. And I pay attention to the CDC guidelines. And the CDC guidelines call for restrictions that are even stronger than what I would advocate for us going forward. But at a minimum, I am very concerned about the rolling back of restrictions, both based on the data that we have on our dashboard and based on the data available through the Wake County Public Health website and through the North Carolina Health and Human Services website. And I believe that we must take that seriously. I am not willing, as unfortunately Dr. Benjamin from the ABC Collaborative wrote today, a statement that said community cases provide zero information as to how successful schools are at preventing within-school transmission. That is in direct conflict with what the CDC is saying. The CDC classifies low transmission, moderate transmission, substantial transmission, and high transmission. They categorize those in terms of cases per 100,000 persons. Their categorization says low is 0 to 9. And this is from the February 17th guidance from the CDC, that is the current guidance. They say moderate is 10 to 49. They say substantial is 50 to 99. High is greater than 100,000, or 100. And that's cases, weekly cases per 100,000 population. Okay? Currently, the average in Wake County, according to the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services data that was released on Monday, is sitting at 108. So that is still in the high transmission, getting close to the boundary. If you look in Wake County at the 5 to 17-year-olds, which is the cohort of our school-age population, they are at 115 per 100,000. That is well into the high transmission level. Now, importantly, these numbers from the CDC, if you read all of their studies, work from the assumption that the school-age cases will be lower than the community-based number of cases. And that is where they put this recommendation into place. As I have shared with you, for the second week in a row, here in Wake County, the 5 to 17-year-old cases are above the county average. That is not what, that is a worse situation than the assumptions that went into this document. If you look at the reported cases on our dashboard, not going anywhere else, and our dashboard is voluntary submission and only counts those people who are actually in the buildings. So let's be generous. Let's say that all 85,000 students in Non-Virtual Academy are in that pool. And let's say that 20,000 staff are in that pool. That's an exaggeration. That's 105,000 people. So that means if you look at the weekly cases reported, you can pretty much count those cases and fit them into CDC's benchmarks. 0 to 9, 10 to 49, 50 to 99, or greater than 100. Our reported cases, not going to everybody in Wake County, our reported cases for the last week, if you count Monday through Friday, were 63. If you look at the dashboard and you count, as Mr. Simmons does, going from Wednesday through Thursday, there are 79 cases. Either way you count it, Monday through Friday or Wednesday through Thursday, we are just the school population, not the community, just the school population is under what CDC calls substantial transmission. You cannot tell me that there will not be in-school transmission under those conditions. The problem is a problem of numbers. Because if you've got, for easy figuring, if you've got 100 cases per 100,000 population, that translates to 1 case per 1,000. If you suggest an elementary school, which one of our large elementary schools might have about 1,000 people in it, that means at that high level of transmission, you would expect, at most, 1 case per week. So you see, our whole school system and each individual school is such a small number that you're never going to see these large number of cases that people are talking about. If you don't see in-school transmission, there is no effect. On top of that, I think it's important to recognize that, so you've been careful with your language. The confirmed secondary transmission in schools is low. Now, why do we have to say confirmed? Because the vast majority of cases have no origin. So if I don't know, to say that it wasn't caused by the school is equally problematic as to say that it was caused by the school. So let's be really careful with those numbers. Now, we're saying that our school metrics are going in the right direction. Let's forget about even just the cases per population, because we've not been given the population per grade level that's in schools. But if you look at the student cases reported on our dashboard, the student cases reported for the weeks starting February 21st and February 28th surpass the rates for the weeks of November 29th and the weeks of December 6th. Where we are currently at are greater than the second and third highest cases in the student population that we have seen since we reopened. We are only behind the one data reporting, which was 12/13, and that was the high. I suspect we're going up. So the last 2 weeks are the second and third highest reported number of student cases since we've opened. Why? I'm not here to put my finger on the why. But if you look at our number of cases, we fit in the high transmission region. And Dr. Fauci himself said, do not relax the guidelines until national cases get below 10,000 cases per day. 10,000 cases per day times the 328.2 million population in the United States times 7 days translates to 21 cases per 100,000 population. Our reported numbers are between 60 and 65 cases per 100,000 population. Not community, I'm talking just our Wake County schools community. We are more than 3 times what Dr. Fauci has said should be the criteria for when you should relax recommendations. To be clear, I know you'd like me to be quiet.
No.
But this is information that needs to be out.
No, I was going to say that. With all due respect, do you have a question?
I'm providing information because the question isn't here. I mean, the questions are, why are we claiming that our numbers are better than they were? They're going in the right direction, when the last 2 weeks are the second and third highest number of students since the pandemic began. It's kind of hard to say that's going in the right direction. The right direction claim is based on the overall county numbers. The overall county numbers are going down. But again, as data that I've provided to all of you, something in Wake County has caused the 5 to 9-year-old numbers to plateau. All other cohorts, with the slight exception of the 0 to 1-year-olds, continue to go down. The 5 to 9-year-olds are plateaued. Why? Why is everybody else going down? So I can't sit here and say that our community numbers are going in the right direction. The overall community is, but we have to look at the population that we're talking about. The population that we're talking about, forget the county numbers, forget the DHS numbers, look just at our Wake County numbers. And you have the second and third highest number of weekly cases per student in the last 2 weeks. That says, be careful in rolling back your restrictions. Specifically, as I have argued many times at this table, we have to pay attention to distance. And it's not linear distance. It's the number of people in the classroom. The CDC talks about de-densification. De-densification is what we need to do to increase the air quality to make sure that our students are safer. It is no coincidence when you take the numbers in Wake County and divide it by, take the whole numbers, divide it by 13, and then multiply by the number of grade levels. It's no coincidence that our middle schoolers are showing the least number of relative cases. Why? Because they're in hybrid mode. They're only in hybrid mode. Why is the elementary in Wake County higher than even the high school? When in Wake County and in the state of North Carolina, the elementary school level should be at the lowest. So something about our data is inverse from what the rest of the county is and from what the state is. We have to add distance. Now, if you look at our planning assumptions guide for the facilities, we state that This is in normal times, folks. In normal times, spaces in existing schools will be considered adequate if the size is not less than 75% of the approved space standards. That presumably means that if you're below 75%, you do not meet our acceptable level. Well, our standards are based on a 900 square foot classroom, and the maximum population in our assumptions is 24. But if you take 75% of your 950 square feet, that's 712 square feet. If you put 30 students into that 712 square foot space, you have 23.75 square feet per student. That's a 4.9 by 4.9 area. If you take off 1.5 feet for the size of a human, that's 3 feet spacing. So our guidelines of what we say is acceptable is 3 feet spacing. But what we are told is that many of our schools in their present operation cannot even maintain 3 feet distancing. That means we are not following our own capital planning assumptions that say acceptable should not be less than 75% of the planning assumptions. So the fact that we can't even agree to a minimum of 3 feet of distancing, which will not be possible with the motion as presented today, puts us in opposition to our own capital planning assumption document. So my call is not to push everybody back into hybrid. I want this pandemic to end. Why do you think I spend all this time tracking the data? I want to see the pandemic to end. I, like Dr. Fauci and the head of CDC, am worried that if we relax too early, if we relax our restrictions too early, we're going to prolong this thing. I don't want to prolong this pandemic anymore. I'm sick of it. But the decision that we're making tonight, if this vote passes, is a decision to prolong the pandemic at the short expense of a few more people sitting in a classroom like this, not regular in-person instruction, still sitting in front of computers. We're prolonging the pandemic for little to no value. I will strongly be voting no.
Mr. Hegarty.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. So I think everyone around this table, no matter how you vote tonight, I think we all have the best interests of our students, of our staff, and our community at heart. And I think reasonable people can come to different conclusions based on looking at the same set of facts. And so, I want to be careful that we don't characterize each other falsely as being, for closing schools or anything like that. I think all of us are simply trying to figure out the best way to proceed. So let's be careful as we go along, knowing that I think we're all trying to make the best decision possible with the information that we have. Now, I've read the data and the reports that Dr. Martin has shared with all of us. I've read the response that we've gotten from Dr. Benjamin. I've read several independent peer-reviewed reports. I've looked at the World Health Organization guidance, the CDC guidance. I have talked to principals, I've talked to staff, I've talked to parents. I've talked to 5 different pediatricians and 1 health official, all about the decision that we have before us. And I'm going to come to a different conclusion than Dr. Martin did, though I respect his logical process and how he came out to where he did. And I understand where he's coming from, and I believe it is well motivated. But to me, what's missing in that analysis He said, I don't want to put my finger on the why. Why are these numbers plateauing? Why are we seeing these numbers move in this direction? I think you have to ask that why. And I think if you do want the pandemic to end, we all want the pandemic to end, I think you have to ask that why.
Mr. Haggerty, I'll be very glad to ask that why, but that
Dr.
gets into
Martin.
speculative
Dr. Martin.
hypothesis, which
Dr.
we
Martin.
cannot do with the data.
All right, so I did my best not to interrupt, Mr. Chair. And I had intended to go through this point by point, but if you're telling me that we can't arrive at a hypothesis,
I'd be glad to.
you cannot take numbers that are irrelevant and out of context and use them as scare tactics to try to keep our kids out of the schools. And if you want to continue a back and forth like that, I'm happy to engage at that level. If you would, as I have let you present your point, trying to show you the respect with that introduction, trying to grant you, if you're not willing to grant me the same respect, then I'll take you on point by point on each one of these. And you can decide. So here's what I will tell you. The CDC has also said schools should be the first to open and the last to close. The CDC has talked about the harmful mental health impacts upon our children created by the isolation of being outside of our schools. These are real. Each one of these pediatricians that I have talked to, whether they're working with young children or teenagers, have talked about the increase in everything from anxiety to obesity to an inability to communicate with adults. They've talked about, just even the limited exposure some of these children received when they were able to go back to school, how the parents and the doctors themselves have seen an increase in those students' health and well-being. I was willing to hear your argument and respect your argument and look at it coming from a place of good intent. But I can tell you that no health official, no one employed in the care of children that I have talked to shares your opinion. And I will tell you that no health official that I have
Respectfully, Mr.
talked
Haggerty.
to have shared that opinion.
Respectfully, Mr. Haggerty.
I don't
Correct.
think this is respect.
I have
Dr. Martin.
never said
I do
close
not
the
think-
schools.
Dr. Martin, you do not have the floor.
Then don't.
Mr. Haggerty, please continue.
Do not let him tell me that I'm trying to close the schools. I'm
Dr.
saying
Martin.
open the schools safely with the regulations.
So if to continue, what I will say is that we have seen in peer review study after peer review study that community spread by itself is not an indicator of whether or not to open the schools. And so if you talk about how we keep children safe and you talk about how we end the pandemic, you have to ask the question, why is there community spread among these age groups? Why do some of these age groups plateau? And if you talk to pediatricians and you talk to doctors about their hypotheses, which they freely make as part of their professional duties, they will tell you that there is spread, and there is spread in the community, and it is spread outside of the schools. I don't know how everyone here conducts themselves outside of the school board. I don't know if you visit shops or restaurants, shopping malls. I do. And I will tell you, as part of my professional duties in my job, I have to travel around the city. As part of my lifestyle, I will stop by restaurants. And at lunchtimes in Wake County, I will see restaurants full of unmasked high school-aged children sitting right next to each other, maskless, eating during the day. And they're doing this because they're out of school. If you look at other numbers plateauing across age groups, for all of the adults, we know why they're plateauing. They're plateauing because they're declining because we have vaccines. And we know the youngest children don't have vaccines. This is what the pediatricians I've talked to have told me. Okay? So, it's not that our schools can exist in some bubble outside of the community where there will be no risk of any possible infection to anyone. But there's no place in our community where these children are going, where they will be completely isolated and inoculated from any risk. And they will be safer in those schools following these guidelines with mandatory mask use, with the social distancing, the physical distancing that we can put in there, than they will be in many cases around our community. So, you know, I understand the concern, but I really, if you look at what's going on in our community, if you talk to doctors, if you talk to child psychologists, if you talk to our local and our state health officials, you know, this is a move that we should make. There are steps to mitigate risk, but we have to balance that with the risks to the health, mental and physical health of our students. And the medical professionals and the health officials are telling us that this is a move that we should make. So, again, I apologize for getting a bit agitated. It's not the speech that I had intended to make, but I think I will wrap it up at that part and just say that I support the superintendent's recommendation. I also will say that I know there's some challenges at some of our schools with this deadline, and we may need to talk about some strategies for that. And I know that at our meeting we had talked to the superintendent. We talked about the superintendent having the discretion maybe to look at schools individually and work with them to help them meet the guidelines that we want. So I did support the motion that Ms. Kushner made for that date. I'm open to other ideas that we can help individual schools to reopen safely as they need to as we go forward. But I think that, you know, there is an urgency here that we have to honestly address. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hager. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you. I do think, I agree that it's important that we avoid making sweeping generalizations about assumptions of where other people are coming from. Just as a general standpoint, sweeping generalizations are so harmful, especially when it comes to our public school system, or any school for that matter. There are times where, if you're looking at an individual family, maybe the parent, you know, a child doesn't have a great relationship with a teacher, but you certainly don't judge the whole school by that. You certainly don't judge anyone. And I think when it's getting into something that's so extremely personal, we're still in a global pandemic, and we're all doing our best to navigate that. And as elected school board members, we're doing our best to operate our schools. And when we reach the point of heated disagreements, I'm not inserting myself into that, but I do just ask us to please remember where we're all coming from, and to remember our why when we ran for these positions. So I have just a few quick questions. One of the things I've been thinking about, particularly after Durham Public Schools announced they were going to bring students back into the classroom, something their superintendent did say at that time was, if you can have your students stay in their virtual academy, please do so, to help reduce the number of students in their buildings. And I just wanted to extend gratitude to families who have chosen our virtual academy for that very reason. Because while there are people who are going out and about, who have the luxury, to do that if they aren't at risk, or for whatever reason, there are many people who have not hugged their grandparents, who have not seen friends, who have not gone on play dates or stayed overnight or gone to the mall with their friends. And I think it's important to acknowledge the people who've made that decision and made that sacrifice to allow those who really, really need to be in person to have that choice that we're trying so very hard to provide for them. So I just wanted to say a thank you to the people, because I know there are literally tens of thousands who are doing that. One of the things, as we're arguing a bit, or we have different opinions rather, on how to move forward, when I do look at Johnston County's dashboard, Superintendent Moore, they do a breakdown for every school, not just of active student quarantine and active staff quarantines. And I think when you look at the choices that a school system makes, and you wonder why there are, maybe a certain number of days or a certain number of cohorts, or you wonder what's happening. When you look at the number of staff members who are actively quarantined at a singular school, it can certainly paint a clearer picture, I think, for the community to understand the impact that has. They also, just have an active percent positive. They have just different metrics that are listed, and I appreciate that we have continued to increase the type of information that we're sharing on our dashboard. But I am asking that if that is something that we could look into doing and providing a little bit more information. That is one of the recommendations from the ABC Science Collaborative, is to have as much information as possible about active cases, and I think it's helpful to also have access to the number of quarantines at the school as well. And as we're looking at school by school basis, I again find myself concerned about particularly some of our multi-track year-round schools, that even knowing that roughly 50% of their students might be virtual, that's still a lot of kids in the building at the same time. And I'm concerned about the lunch plans and what type of feedback has been provided from those individual schools on their ability to maintain the new lunch and eating guidelines.
So, two quick things. First, the data that you see on the Johnston County Public Schools website is provided by their health department. So I do think that there's some space for conversations there if we want to expand on how we can collaborate for that. And so we will certainly take that under advisement and pursue that. Second, we are gathering feedback right now about the implementation of the eating and drinking guidance, and we have spoken with both our own health services, the county health department, and DHHS about whether or not there is some space for updating guidance there as well, so that we can be responsive to, schools are obviously implementing the guidance that is not without some difficulty and less than optimal. It's the safety sometimes runs counter to the social aspects that are a big part of being in school. And so we've been taking that feedback, and we are working with folks to look at what updates and changes we can make that make sense, because we still have to maintain safety in mind as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the information about the health information being shared. I think that just the lunch plans, that and even the last time being in a classroom, and I know some of my colleagues have witnessed this or received feedback as well, there were still some schools that did not have either appropriate or enough furniture to have all of their 4th and 5th grade students back in full time.
So that is also something that we've been chasing down since yesterday. And last week, actually, we started hearing from some schools, because we have plenty of individual student desks and furniture in our warehouse that are available for schools that want to trade furniture out. Those schools that had not already done so by the end of December that are looking to do that now, we asked our area superintendents to get information from all of the schools in their areas that had any type of furniture trade out or change needs. And we are working with our folks through facilities or other departments to utilize some existing contracts we have with moving folks because we're moving schools that go into renovations and new schools and that sort of stuff all the time. So we have existing contracts with some companies to help support what the warehouse can't do on their own with their own fleet of vehicles. So we've gathered all of that information as of today. It's ready. David Nieder and his team are on it. The area superintendents are on it, and we're getting schools what they need.
I appreciate that. And I just forgot my last question. Chair Sutton, if I remember that, I'll raise my hand, but thank you very much for that information.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott, for your questions. Are there other board members who have not been recognized already that have a question? Mrs. Cash.
Well, I don't actually have a question, but I just wanted to say that I think that as we were out visiting many of the schools, most of the principals, a great number of them, had already been ready and planning for their fourth and fifth graders to come back next Monday. And the majority of them have done some really creative things to be ready because, probably all of our principals have done some really creative things, but I know that they've been planning for this and been ready to go. So I think we should move forward and let them do what they do best.
I think a lot of work has gone in about all of our schools and principals to be ready for this decision and the upcoming date. As Mr. Hagerty touched upon, we know that there may be challenges at some schools for various reasons. That may be things that might be beyond their control. But with our last meeting, we gave our superintendent the authority to manage those situations and make decisions appropriately, where if they cannot meet the 15th deadline, she and her team will work with those administrators to ensure that those schools will come online as soon as it is possible, be it challenges with desk, chairs, furniture, or other factors that might impede their ability to open as soon as the 15th. So we trust in that process. We trust in our superintendent that she and her team will handle that and respond appropriately. Ms. Carter, you had a comment or question?
A quick comment and question. I will be supporting this, and I'm glad that it's been brought forth today. And I had just a question. I don't know if Superintendent Moore, if you could address it, or if Dr. Mutillo is on the call, because I know we've heard a lot about concerns about absences with vaccines or any side effects. And, with us looking at the date to start March 15th, could maybe someone address that? What maybe proactive steps are being taken and what things are being done to address that?
I do think AJ is on, so he can provide a little bit of background on how we collect data from schools and try to meet their needs.
Ma'am, thanks, Ms. Carter, Superintendent Moore. One of the things that we have been doing is tracking through our daily staffing tool. Principals are letting us know of different vaccine appointments and when they expect to have teachers out. So we are monitoring those and putting all calls out to subs when we can, and really are just going to put an all call out to any other employee group who can help support in that area. One of the things we've been able to strategically do with a lot of our vaccine partners is schedule vaccines so that they're not during the school day. So that has helped, but I do know that teachers have secured appointments in other ways and may be missing time for both the appointment as well as side effects. So short answer is we're monitoring the numbers and we'll do everything we can to provide additional help and other resources to schools. But there will still be coverage that needs to take place at the building by school staff. I don't want to paint a picture that's unrealistic, but we will do everything we can from the central level to provide additional resources as well.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. So appreciate that information because that is helpful, I think, to hear. And like I said, I'm just grateful to have this be presented tonight. I as well have spoken to mental health providers and medical providers in our community, and I indeed think this is a step in a good direction for many of our students where it has been very difficult for them. So I'm, again, looking forward to supporting the vote. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you. A couple of follow-ups, and again, Superintendent Moore, you're well aware of my questions that I asked, which two board members have already brought them up. So one of my follow-ups to the furniture is getting it there by when, right? I mean, so if we're getting it there Saturday, again, as I mentioned to you, in most of my elementary schools, not only are their desks spread out, but they have tape on the floor aligned to ensure the desk stays in their square. So for a lot of, at least the schools I saw, it's not just putting the furniture, it is organizing it so that they keep the spacing. So do we have any time frame on what that looks like in terms of how much help they can provide to those schools on the weekend?
So the help that will be provided will be the help that is needed in terms of making sure that we get everything done in time. We had an email that was sent out just earlier this afternoon as we were gathering them, and it's not a ton of schools. It's like about 20 schools that have some issues with swapping out furniture. And just to provide some context for those that are listening, a lot of our schools moved to collaborative furniture where 2 or 3 kids sit at a table. And in order to abide by social distancing, they were trading out those tables for individual student desks. Or in some cases, to be more efficient more quickly, they moved those 4th and 5th grade, which tend to be in individual student desks, down to K-3 classrooms, and they didn't have them anymore in the 4th and 5th grade classrooms. So it's some trading and swapping that's going on across schools. So the email that went out just basically said specifically, we need schools to tell us what they need, where they need it, mark it on the floor, put it ready so we just can put it right where it needs to be. Our intention is to try and get all of that done by the end of this week. And it's really not that many schools I think we can do it.
Okay, and the second follow-up is, so Mr. Matillo gave us an answer, but not really an answer to actually filling the schools with staffing. Again, especially those schools who were already with, and I mean have teacher vacancies, not teachers on accommodations. And again, as you know, Superintendent Moore, one of my schools has not been able to secure substitutes at all. And so I don't know if Dr. Matillo has any more recent feedback on how we're going to support those schools who absolutely have had no substitute supports reporting to their schools.
So I'm not sure if AJ still is on, but I think that in terms of one of the things that you were asking about, Human Resources does contact subs specifically that pick up our jobs when the school lets us know they're having trouble finding subs. I think it might have been you who even shared with me that some schools are asking their subs to go to other colleagues' schools that are having trouble picking up subs to try to sort of share their resources. I think those will continue to be important. I think for what's coming up right now with regards to the potential for absences due to vaccines, as Dr. Matillo noted, we're looking at the folks that are not in schools that are WCPSS employees to go to schools for a couple, 2 days, however long is needed in order to provide some of that relief as well. We've been using some volunteers from WCPSS, from Central Services, to go out to schools periodically. That's sort of ebbed a little bit in the last few days. We need to ramp it back up for this, to support this endeavor as well.
I can add to Superintendent Moore that we've been working. Sorry, Ms. Johnson-Hostler, just wanted to add to that response for your question. We have been working with the schools who have not been able to secure that daily sub as well, and we have those numbers down to about 22 schools. So HR staff, including myself, are literally calling subs as they get approved to highlight the need for these different schools. So we're also starting a strategy where we're going to have a different meeting right after sub orientation, again, to try to personally connect with the subs and let them know and highlight the needs of our schools. So our efforts to get more subs continue. We have made an improvement. We're seeing more subs pick up jobs, but we know our effort is not over, and we need to continue to work toward getting more subs in schools.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and I've certainly had a couple of my parents go through our sub, and they all give high praise to the substitute training. One of them texted me after she finished last week. So great job to your team who's doing the substitute training. I've heard nothing but delightful feedback. Because again, like everyone, we're all trying to get our schools to be fully staffed so that they can adequately open. So another follow-up to that, Dr. Matillo, does that 22 include subs that are needed daily, or is that for the schools that need long-term subs?
These are the efforts to get the daily subs that we're calling them daily subs, but they're there to report to the school every day, not necessarily to fill a consistent long-term vacancy, but to fill any need that happens to arise uncovered at the school.
So thanks for that distinction. So does that mean we have a different plan for those, for instance, a school who has 2 teachers who are no longer with us, and so they have what would be considered at this point a long-term vacancy?
Yeah, we also have that long-term list that we are working through and trying to highlight, but it sounds like you are also thinking of a school in particular, so we may need to touch base, so I make sure.
Absolutely, I am. I have several who have 2 or more long-term vacancies. And they're in our, of course, grades that we're talking about. So I will certainly send you the name of the schools that are certainly concerns. But I bring it up because, again, if I wouldn't have been in the school building, I would not have known today to say that that school has long-term vacancies for substitutes. And so, again, largely we bring things to the table because oftentimes we're highlighting something that one of us may not have known, because we do have a significant number of schools who have significant differences, and oftentimes they're more alike than we know. So I will certainly send you the ones I know, but I also think it's important that in your surveying that we're asking that question, because, again, I'm not sure how we're asking the question to get responses, right? I mean, if you ask me about a sub, I may be answering you about the daily sub and not the long term. So whatever we need to do to get the responses so that we're filling those in whatever ways we can. So thank you for taking that, and I'll follow up. And again, I think the thing I'll say is, I mean, clearly before I walked into the schools this week, I was clear on how I was going to vote last week, and again, I'm still clear on how I'm going to vote today. But I do think it is completely necessary to say, while absolutely all of our principals and administrators alike have done everything to prepare themselves, but the reality is, I've not met an educator who is not a planner, so to tell them today that we're going to get them desks by Friday is not really planning for education standards. And so I think we also have to acknowledge that there is a significant amount of concern about short-term turnaround to turn these schools around who've made various numbers of accommodations to meet the needs of their schools. So thank you, Superintendent Moore, for ensuring that they'll have, in your words, they'll have people available for whatever they need them available for. And I think that certainly will ease some of the concerns for people to know that if they need people to help tape floors, then we'll tape floors. And that's essentially what I said. Happy to come tape floors. If that's going to make it easier for our schools and a little relief for families to know all that work has been done before we return the students to the building, or a greater number of students to the building. So thank you for responding and being quick to respond to Superintendent Moore to my questions and concerns. I appreciate the lightning fast ability to do that. At the end of the day, I mean, I think all of our board members have expressed the angst that all of us have over any decision we're making regarding students, our own students and all of our students in Wake County. And I think all of this you see is passion and care for our community. And I think it's important for the community to note that our board has almost 100% been civil in my 2013, since I've been here in 2013. And I think what you see is exactly what we're talking about with the need to open our school doors, is because the sense of anxiety and stress is building in all of us, and it's showing up in multitudes of ways. And while normal is never going to be normal again, there is a strong sense to give something, some sense, which I would say for student school is their autonomy, because it's the one place that they go that their parents aren't. And so there is a need to be able to give them back some space and some sense of what they would consider normal for themselves. And it is our job as adults to question every single decision we make and mull it over and change our mind 20 times over, because we are worried about the decision we're making. Nobody is making it lightly. But at the end of the day, I think what I've heard Superintendent Moore say in every single area superintendent and school administrator I've talked to is they are still open to make accommodations for families that they need. And so I think the thing that I will say, Superintendent Moore, is also a part of this conversation is for families who may have chosen Plan B and have severe anxiety about going back into the buildings. Then I do think we have to be honest with our administrators that you're going to probably be making far more concessions than you imagine of getting the building ready, but also potentially changing students right now. who have chosen Plan A or B. And that's a hard thing to ask our administrators to do. But for me, I think we have to be honest that the thought of this still scares some families. And to Ms. Scott's point, who've taken all types of care because they thought Plan B would have much lower numbers. Nobody expected we'd be here. And so I also don't think it's fair to say, well, people who chose Plan B knew they were going to go back. Nobody foresaw this. When I checked Plan B, I certainly did not foresee this. So I can speak for myself. I did not think Plan B meant we would be here. Now, I have a different level of comfort, but there are parents who don't have that level of comfort. And so I will say, and I don't have the answer to this, I just think it's important because I know our administrators listen, that I want them to hear me say, I know that this is a heavy lift, all of it is, but I also recognize that we have to honor both sides of this, and that is as we're sending kids and students and families who are ready to go back, and we're okaying that, we're also okaying families who need to change their minds because they're not ready. And I don't know how we manage that, so I'm so glad we gave you back all of your authority to figure those things out, but I think it's necessary for administrators to know and hear me say personally that it's a heavy lift, but I can't rightfully do this without acknowledging that some people who chose Plan B are not going to be ready, and we have to be okay with that and find ways to accommodate those families as well.
I just appreciate that feedback. I hear you.
I also know that I'm giving you a hard job too. I want to acknowledge that as well, Superintendent Moore, and I appreciate all of your hard work and diligence in all the heavy.
Ms. Mahaffey.
All of my questions have been asked.
Wonderful. I'll go back for a second round of questions quickly. Mrs. Kushner.
I'll try to be very quick. One was, I was wondering, Ms. Moore, and I appreciate Ms. Johnson-Hostler raising that we have to acknowledge the stresses our administrators have been under. But I was wondering, one of them is the carpool. And I was wondering if we've considered doing a single attestation that students can do ahead of time and maybe just going to a temperature check in carpool just to get things moving quicker. Are we able to do some sort of attestation for carpoolers as well to say no or to all the COVID questions or yes
So,
to answer them?
right. So we're exploring that actually from two different venues. One would be what we might be able to implement that would allow for something like an attestation for students and only a temperature check. But also we are exploring it from the avenue of conversations and with other state superintendents and North Carolina DHHS, as the daily screening is not recommended by the CDC and never has been. And so that was a decision that our North Carolina DHHS made for school systems at the beginning of the implementation of the Plan A, B, and C. So there's some conversations that are occurring at multiple levels about what can be done, because that is a burden that schools bear for school kids coming in every day. And whether, and I'm not sure where it'll go or how it'll change, but we're looking at it from a couple of different places.
Thank you for that, because I think it would help with carpool if we were just doing just a temperature check, just in order to have some protocol for our students coming in. Because I think it's very important to say we're not relaxing those guidelines for lunch, because that is a risk of COVID, and our students are doing a great job with masking from what I hear. But I think we have to be vigilant about the new meal protocols, because they are working. Wake County schools, 193 schools that we have, only 5 have shown any secondary spread. I think that is a data point that should be stated at the table, because it is a great accomplishment of the hard work of our teachers and our administrators to reduce secondary spread. Since the beginning, that has been the goal, an important measure for how we are reopening. And we have to lift up that hard work, because there are other K-12 schools in this county that have much higher rates and clusters than Wake County schools. We've only had 5 out of our 193 have secondary spread. And I just want to lift that work up, because we have been strong in our protocols. We've taken the ABC Science Collaborative guidelines seriously. We have gone gradually into reopening in, I think, a very thoughtful way. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Mrs. Kushner. Mrs. Scott.
Thank you.
At any given time, do we know the number of times or the number of, at our schools, how many principals are in fact covering classes every day? I know that happens now and then, but I mean, right now, could an area superintendent tell you how much actual time are our principals having to do their principal duties and not covering classes?
AJ, is that, what is in your daily tracking?
We have not specifically asked about principals and when they are covering classes. That would have to be information we would request. Anecdotally, I do know that obviously it happens, but I don't have data on it. We can pull from our daily staffing, we can pull the number of employees who have been reassigned to pick up different duties, but it's not position specific.
Sure, and I appreciate that clarification. I think it's important to recognize that in order to have children back in school, I mean, there's a lot going on, and I do worry about the trickle down impact on a principal not being able to coach teachers in the same way. I mean, our principals wear many different hats, and one of the important ones is to be able to work with educators and all of their employees to set up expectations and to help them grow in their roles. And we really have been operating in such an emergency capacity. So I think that's, several of my colleagues asked about the number of unfilled sub positions and, how this is continuing to happen. I think it's just important to acknowledge what is taking place, and also not just anecdotally, so we can say, look how hard this is, but from a realistic standpoint of what's the breaking point, and when does or should a school pivot into remote or classrooms in remote, which I know is taking place as needed right now, but there is a breaking point, and people are extremely stressed, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. And then I had one clarification question. Chair Sutton, you mentioned that Superintendent Moore would continue to have her discretionary authority with bringing students back. So are there schools right now that you anticipate would not be ready to bring back students full-time on March 15th if the proposal passes?
I don't have confirmation that any are saying they have a barrier that can't be addressed, because we would need to know that very quickly in order to make sure that families were aware. So, but there are none that I know of at this time.
Okay, and I guess my concern is, while respecting that we gave that authority, my concern that, should there be very real barriers that you may come to find out tomorrow or 5 minutes after this meeting's over.
You will know.
I worry then about the emails we have been receiving as board members, starting to go to those individual principals for matters that really, in these extreme cases, are kind of things that are outside of their hands. It's through no fault of their own. And I worry about that because I know how hard they've been working, and I would rather continue to get those emails than have our principals have that burden on their shoulders. I hope I'm making sense with that.
Yeah, no, Mrs. Scott, thank you for that. My comment was probably more in the spirit of acknowledging what Ms. Johnson-Hostler was saying, that there may be some, just kind of acknowledging, recognizing that there may be some change, that we need to offer some grace, flexibility, as we've always been saying, over this last year as well. But right now, not anticipating that there are any schools that won't be able to make it on the 15th, but allowing for that recognition, acknowledgement, flexibility, and understanding. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. As I noted before, I want to emphasize that this is not a vote as to open or close, as I was again accused of arguing. I am not. This is not a vote to open or close. The question before us is, do we lift restrictions? to that point, there is agreement that we can have schools open for in-person instruction if all appropriate restrictions are in place. There is nebulous discussion about social distancing. My first question is, what is our criteria for making a social distancing guideline? Do we have any? Is there ever a situation where we're going to look at it and say, there is not enough space here, there's too high of a density, this can't operate? Or are we going to just leave it at a general statement that says do the best social distancing you can? So my question is, what is our criteria for social distancing?
So, Dr. Martin, we're adhering to the guidelines set by the Department of Health and Human Services and the Strong Schools Toolkit. So we're not creating, to my knowledge, any additional guidelines with respect to social distancing.
I'm asking the superintendent.
Right. Those guidelines state to the extent practicable. So that there's not a requirement for an amount of social distancing. It is minimal for Plan A.
So can I therefore assume, well, what is your perception of the statement in the capital planning assumptions guideline that states spaces in existing schools will be considered adequate if the size is not less than 75% of the approved space standard? It strikes me as considered adequate. This is in pre-COVID times. It strikes me that what is considered adequate in pre-COVID should at least be a minimum under COVID restrictions. Is that not a reasonable assumption? Or do we not support our statement in our capital planning assumptions guide?
I do believe that our planning assumptions are guidelines. I do not pretend to know that we are able to always implement them in all schools because they are planning assumptions. They are not hard and fast requirements.
So the statement says adequate is defined as not less than 75% of approved space standards. So the planning assumptions are the space standards. This statement says adequate. This is in pre-COVID times. Adequate is defined as not less than 75% of approved space standards. And again, the reason I'm pushing this is because I do believe that we're talking about restrictions. What is social distancing? Yes, I agree. Plan A gives us the legal flexibility. But what I'm hearing is that we're willing to, under COVID conditions, move to social distancing that is outside of what we define as adequate under non-COVID conditions. And I just want to verify, is that what we're saying?
I'm not convinced that that's what we're saying.
I don't feel like that's a question that is one that there's a preparation in terms of looking at what's in our planning assumptions versus how we are making decisions about Plan A, B, or C. We are using the guidance from DHHS for what would be the normal number of students that we would have in a classroom based on how the school has allocated their resources. And that space then, the amount of that space or space that they don't have is as dependent on how they're allocating the resources that they have as they are with what's written in a planning assumptions guide. So,
do we have a level that we consider adequate? Or do we have no level considered adequate to define overcrowding?
Again, how that is implemented in reality at the school level is really going to be driven by how a principal has chosen to allocate their resources, their staffing resources at those grade levels. We have provided some information previously, and there are some folks available that can talk about average class sizes in 4th and 5th grade if we want to talk about those.
I fully understand that, and those are in our planning assumptions as well. 4th and 5th grades planning assumptions are a 950 square foot classroom with 24 to 26 students in that classroom. So we can take that, and look at 75% of that approved space standard, and that would seem to be our definition of adequate. But I think what I'm hearing is that we are not willing to, just like at our last vote, Mr. Haggerty and I were the two votes that asked for at least a standard that says, under COVID restrictions, we do not have crowding at a level that is higher than what we would classify as appropriate under non-COVID times. That's not asking even for 6 feet. That's just asking for, are we willing to, under COVID standards?
So, Dr. Martin, I mean, these are planning assumptions. They're not policies. So, Mr. Bloomberg, help me out, but it seems to me that policy would override any assumptions, especially in a time of an emergency situation where we not only have our own policy, we have policy or guidance from DHHS, which seems to me would override any planning assumptions that we have in place.
I would agree with that, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, at a really, really high level, basically say that the sort of the guiding critical document that the Wake County Public School System and other school districts have followed and should follow is the toolkit, Strong Schools from DHHS. And we've certainly been studying that with great care. The district has with great care and complying with it. And that document is very clear that through K-5 that the district can be in Plan A or Plan B. Wake County Schools is electing, if it approves this motion, to have all elementary in Plan A, which is within the options available in that document. That document does have a number of safety protocols in it that for Plan A. And additional ones in Plan B, primarily the 6 feet. The 6 feet are not in Plan A across the board, but there are a number of safety protocols in there, including about social distancing, which talks about provide social distance flooring and seating markings and waiting and reception areas, mark 6 feet of spacing to remind students to stay 6 feet apart in lines and at all other times when they may congregate, and many others. And that's the document that the district, if it's in Plan A, needs to comply with, and that is the prevailing document, in my opinion, and in discussions with the superintendent and the board. I think, my guidance is that we need to hug that. And so that's where we are on that.
Okay.
So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
That's what I thought.
Let it be
Thank
clear, my statement is not about the law, because the law gives us complete flexibility.
What was mine about the law? I'm saying the document that we should be following is that Strong Schools, Safe Schools, whatever it is, schools toolkit. That is the guidance, and as our attorney said, the prevailing document, not our planning assumptions.
That toolkit never says it is appropriate to have classrooms at a higher density than would be acceptable or adequate, is our word. That document does not say that it's okay to have classrooms that are higher than what is described as adequate in a non-COVID setting. So yes, you are correct. We're legally covered. We don't have to do anything. The point of these planning assumptions, and by the way, the planning assumption is not the 75%, which is defined as adequate. The planning assumption is at a certain level. And our documents say that we're going to consider adequate if you only meet that by 75%. Okay? That's what we're talking about. So, do we have to? No. Are we legally required to? No. The question is, and what I'm hearing is, we're not willing to abide by what we said was adequate in non-COVID times, not to shut down the schools, but as a restriction in how we deal with our operation. And I think I've heard the answer. My second question is, we're told in the slide that the local and state data rates are trending down after post-holiday increase. to reinforce for the record, I would like it to be stated, what are those parameters that are being used to make that statement? This is not a matter of opinion. We can, like Mr. Haggerty said, we can choose to do different things with the information. But I think we need to be clear on what the information is. And so this statement says state and local rates are trending down after post-holiday increase. What are those rates that we're referring to?
Mr. Simmons. Tim, are you on?
Yeah, I'm on. Yeah. Good evening, Dr. Martin. The rates that are being referred to in those sentences are daily cases and positive rates at the state and local levels.
Are we, what, I know we don't need to go into the detail of taking the state level and dissecting it, because not all the daily cases are going down, or the rates are going down at the state level. But specifically, if you look at the Wake County data as published on the Wake County Public Schools COVID dashboard, what is the trend in the rates over the last 3 weeks?
The trends in the rates over the last 3 weeks, I mean, you can do it in raw numbers. Of course, the challenge with the Wake County schools is that the number of students in the schools at any given time varies. As you and others have pointed out, the more students you bring in, the more positive cases you generally see reported, because the district dashboard reports the number of positive cases that have been on campus within the past 2 weeks. So if you hadn't been on the campus within the past 2 weeks and you were positive, you wouldn't be in those numbers. In that sense, the district metrics page and the DHHS site are all measuring variations on COVID cases. They're not necessarily measuring them in the same way, and then so therefore are not necessarily directly comparable.
So by your statement, we
Dr. Martin, I'm going to allow one more question, then we're going to move on.
Well, I think it's important that we get the answer to the question, right?
I mean, you can ask. You got. Go ahead. You got one more question. This is not an inquisition. So,
this is establishing the information, because we were told that the data is trending down. Based on what Mr. Simmons just said, the presumption is the case numbers are going to go up in the next couple of weeks because more students will have been in. Is that a correct perception?
That would be assumption. The point I'm trying to make here, maybe I'm not being as clear as I need to be, is that the statement that you asked about is based upon the positive rates and the daily cases, because of course our employees are part of that community, and those are trending in an improved direction. What happens on the school level, of course, is going to be dependent upon the number of people on campus, because they're intertwined. Our communities and our schools are intertwined.
So I accept that. I'm not going to be silenced. I'm sorry.
No, I'm not.
This needs to be resolved.
So here's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to be respectful of your colleagues. I've allowed you quite a amount of time during the first round of questions. I allowed you quite a bit of time here. And while I want to respect your desire to share and get that information, I also want to be respectful and ask you to be respectful of the other board members that are here. We don't wish to be lectured to.
I'm not lecturing.
Okay, I'm just honest. We don't wish to be lectured to. So I want to be respectful of their desire to move on with the debate, but also to give them an opportunity to ask questions, ask follow-up questions, and rebuttal as well. So I've given you quite a bit of time here. So I'm just asking you to be respectful of the rest of us, as well as those that are listening in the public to the discussion. So again,
I understand that. My question has not been answered, and it's going to, and how quickly, if we run around in circles, it's going to take longer to answer the question. If we don't run around in circles, then we'll get the answer much more quickly.
Okay, again, I'm going to allow you one more question.
So, well, I'm still trying to get this question answered, and that is the metrics, because the statement is the metrics are trending in the right direction. And I'm trying to ask about the Wake County Public School metrics. I hear, and we can have some disagreement over the county and the state numbers. I'll be glad to look at those with anybody who's willing to look at the actual numbers. But I'm talking about the Wake County Public Schools numbers. Mr. Simmons just said that as more people are coming, cases will go up. Therefore, the numbers on the dashboard, I think I am hearing him say, should we expect to go up? Is that correct? If we keep all else the same.
Yeah. I guess I would answer that question this way. I've been wrong plenty of times, and so I don't particularly want to guess at whether or not the numbers are going up or down on the next iteration of the dashboard. But our schools and our community are intertwined. That's the point that I think is important here. So the statement that you asked about was based upon the county and the state numbers because our schools and our community are intertwined. Again, whether the numbers go up in the future, I think I have made enough guesses in the past and been wrong that I don't necessarily want to be state equivocally that that's going to happen. I don't know that that's going to happen.
Mr. Simmons, I'm sorry, but at one time you're saying things should be related to the community, and the community is going down. But when we look at the Wake County schools numbers, they're going up. So the Wake County schools numbers are going up while the community is going down. Or are we not willing to say the Wake County schools numbers are going up?
Dr. Martin.
Mr. Simmons, is it your answer? Is your answer that you don't know?
Let me just add one piece. The data that we are tracking is confirmed secondary transmissions, and those are incredibly low.
So that's my final point. How do you define confirmed secondary transmission, and what is your confidence that that captures actual secondary transmissions?
We track it through our contact tracing efforts. When there is a positive case. And you know, you've heard us say this before in our collaborations with the ABC Science Collaborative. You cannot control the number of cases that walk into a building, but you must do everything that you can to prevent secondary transmission. So we are tracking secondary transmission, and through our contact tracing efforts, those remain very low.
Superintendent Moore, are you fairly confident, very confident, somewhat confident?
It's, you know, because of the nature of the virus itself with asymptomatic students, it can't be perfect. But I think you would see greater numbers if there was transmission occurring. And the data that we have, those that we collaborate with feel is very positive data, and that includes our county health department and the folks on the ABC Science Collaborative.
Thank you for that. Mrs. Cash.
So I appreciate
Let the record show that most cases have no identification. So that statement is a wishful statement. It is not a factual statement.
Okay.
So I just appreciate all of our colleagues. I think they've asked a lot of really, really good questions, and we spent a lot of time. Would it be appropriate to call for the vote?
Second.
And so that's a call for the question previously made. And so the first vote would be for the board to say, since all board members have had an opportunity to speak, that you are calling the question, and it's a procedural motion. If the board votes in favor of doing that, then that would end further discussion and debate, and then the board would vote on the underlying motion.
Okay, so I call for the question. Second. Did I do that right?
100% right, and it's been seconded, and it's a procedural motion since all board members have spoken. So the board will first vote on that, and then after that, if it's approved, the board will then vote on the underlying motion of the superintendent's recommendations for K4 and 5 to return to Plan A.
All right, got a motion for call for the question. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor show by sign of aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Ayes have it. Now calling for the vote. There is a motion to approve the staff recommendation to move grades 4 and 5 to Plan A on Monday, March 15th. All those in favor show by sign of aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay?
Nay.
The ayes have it. Recommendation from staff is approved. At this time, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Chair Sutton, I make a motion that we adjourn.
Have a motion from Ms. Mahaffey, second from Mrs. Cash to adjourn the meeting. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, show by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Ayes have it. We stand adjourned. Thank you very much.